After meeting a nice synth, you get sent on a quest to retrieve his memories. He seemed kind enough, so you agreed. This mission was not without danger though, having to pass through the heavily irradiated submarine that another, somewhat hostile faction called home. This was only part of the trouble. You also had to make it through the difficult pre-war security systems that had protected his memories for many, many years, preventing all others who had hoped to hear his thoughts. As you eventually get into the computer, the program protecting the memories feels much more like a video game from your pre-war times than like anything close to the hacking you are used to. Finally, you recover his memory tapes and decide to listen. Curiosity gets the better of you. Surely, nothing bad can be on these tapes.
I've made a contingency plan in case Far Harbor discovers the truth.
Hello and welcome to Anatomy of Fiction. In today's video, we will be discussing DiMA. More specifically, was he trying to save the synths or was he trying to do something more sinister? To do this, we will need to discuss several things. Firstly, who or what is DiMA? Where did he come from? And what has he been doing in Far Harbor up to the establishment of his little settlement? Then we should move on to his synth settlement Acadia. And finally, moving on to what are the problematic activities he has been doing, if there are any. To begin, we should learn more about the character himself. So what exactly is DiMA and what is his history? DiMA is a prototype synth. He bridges the gap between Gen 2 and Gen 3 synths. He was created by the Institute, like all other synths. However, unlike other synths, his personality was allowed to develop on its own through personal experience. So he was able to form his own thoughts, feelings, ideas, and beliefs. But this did not mean he was not experimented on. Based on DiMA's earliest memories, he was victim to various experiments done by the Institute.
I was in a laboratory in the Institute. They were pulling pieces of my head out. Something about wanting to test some neural process. That was every day for months. Strapped down, operated on.
This would have modified his beliefs and feelings towards the Institute, considering he was the only one that could completely form their own personality, and the first to have the capability to independently think. We see that he is the only synth to have their own independent formulation of personality, as the second prototype synth's personality instead comes from a pre-war brain scan, so a person who lived prior all of their lived experiences. Because of the freedom that DiMA was given, he formed his own sort of feelings about what was right and wrong. Due to this, he would leave the Institute, helping the other prototype synth escape from what DiMA believed were cruel experiments.
I literally saw myself in you. You were my brother, Nick. I helped you escape the Institute. We left together.
If I were your brother, I'd remember.
That's where you'd be wrong. This happened over a century ago. There's only so much memory that can fit into the prototype brains we have.
They would then go their separate ways after fleeing the Institute, as the second prototype, this being Nick Valentine, would become hostile towards DiMA due to his experimental programming. So DiMA would make his way to Far Harbor, finding a cave to hide in. Hiding from the Institute out of fear they would come and find him. He would sit there for almost a year. After realizing that the Institute was not coming to capture him in the middle of the night, he would leave the safety of his cave. This is where he realized even without a pre-programmed objective, he could do his own thing, set his own course, and have his own goals. He would make his home in the submarine base on the island, remaining here for a while alone, until the children of the atom would stumble upon him. Now this is the first time anyone truly accepted DiMA, and because they treated him with kindness and respect, DiMA trusted them and their leader. So much so that when it became time for DiMA to leave, he would gift them the base, as a sign of trust and friendship. With DiMA leaving, he would have an interesting chance encounter on the island. This is where he would run into Faraday and Chase. They had come to Far Harbor as part of an Institute recovery mission. However, they would hear DiMA out, and this would lead to an interesting sequence of events. Now that we know about what DiMA is, his origins, and his history up until the establishment of Acadia, we should move on. With the trio, DiMA, Faraday, and Chase now being strong believers of the ideology of synth liberation, they would need to find a new base of operations for their synth society. This is where the pre-war observatory would come into play. The group would reclaim this observatory at the top of the mountain in the old national park as a safe haven for synths, this being just the beginnings of DiMA's self-sufficient synth society. This synth society, like the railroad, had an elaborate method of rescuing their runaway synths. Rather than going out into the wastelands, putting themselves at risk of capture, they would instead sound out a radio signal. This was targeted at those who felt as if they had never belonged, the outcasts who were missing memories, because of course Gen 3 synths do have missing memories. They were after all made and not born. They also are not completely human, so this would be causing them to feel as if they don't belong. Being frequently exposed to these messages would lead to the various synths around the wastelands to realize that maybe, just maybe, there was something not quite right, which would lead them to the observatory where Acadia was based. The synths would head through Far Harbor, meeting with Brooks, who would send them on their merry way up the mountain to Acadia, with them making it there most of the time.
We're expecting a new synth to arrive, and he should have been here by now. There's been no sign of him, and I'm concerned that he might have become lost on the way here.
This would allow the faction to grow into a somewhat self-sufficient group, with all of the synths here taking part in the building of the community, so they do not need to rely on the outside. However, due to the moral compass that DiMA developed, they would not exactly be cut off from the outside communities, because the town of Far Harbor would begin to suffer from the toxic fog, with the islanders being pushed closer and closer to the water's edge. Because of DiMA's big robotic heart, he would feel the need to do something about this. This is where, in a trade for supplies and assistance with synths escaping the Institute, DiMA would supply fog condensers which would keep the residents of Far Harbor safe. However, this could be seen as playing favorites, considering that the people of Far Harbor and the cult members in the Children of the Atom kind of hated each other. To put things lightly, DiMA helping one was seen as hurting the other, especially because the Children of the Atom worship the fog, with the new leader of the Children of the Atom taking this especially badly, as the residents of Far Harbor had previously shunned them and even killed members of their group. The Children of the Atom viewed the meddling with the fog as sacrilegious. The fog, in their opinion, was there for a reason, and to mess with what was natural and sacred would incite anger from the Children of the Atom, both towards, obviously, Far Harbor, but also towards Acadia. So Acadia is essentially in the middle of this conflict, with rising concerns of the tension turning into an all-out war between the two. But with the rising tension and the threat of having to choose sides in a potential war, how would DiMA's actions be affected? Well, when it comes to the threat of war, DiMA has his own views on how to handle his friends. Based on what we hear when eavesdropping, DiMA's desires for how to handle the events don't sound all too problematic.
We need to accomplish this without bloodshed. Far Harbor and the Children of Atom have a right to exist on this island, the same as us.
So DiMA claims that all on the island should live there without any fighting. Does this mean he is essentially a synthetic saint? Well, not exactly. DiMA does have some problematic history when it comes to his time on the island. We see this for several reasons, these even being intertwined with his nice actions towards others. For his problematic behavior, we should first begin with his actions towards Far Harbor. Now, DiMA provided them with the fog condensers as a form of protection from the toxic fog. They seem to work through the blue light on top of the fog condenser, absorbing the fog. This then dripping into a container near the bottom of the machine. This provides a clean radius that is free of any sort of damaging fog. These fog condensers also work to discourage the not-so-friendly creatures from attacking the town, as the creatures of the island seem to like the toxic gases within the fog. However, the fog condensers are not the token of peace that they seem to be.
I've isolated the wind turbine powering Far Harbor's fog condensers. A kill switch command will leave them defenseless from the fog and its creatures.
Considering that he considered the town of Far Harbor to be a group they were friendly with, why would he need to install what is essentially a kill switch in the one thing keeping them safe? As if you were to turn these fog condensers off, there would be several things that the town would have to fight against. This of course being the toxic fog, as there would be nothing to keep it at bay. the creatures of Far Harbor as well, as they could now safely and easily move in to attack the town, and also the children of the Atom cult, as they may view it as an opportunity to get rid of Far Harbor once and for all. Considering that the town would be greatly weakened by the sicknesses caused by the fog, along with the fatalities and injuries caused by the creatures, this would make them easy targets. But you may think that DiMA was remorseful and concerned about the safety of himself, Acadia, and the children of the Atom. But the town could have been handled in other ways. What other ways, you may ask? Well, he already had his own ideas about this. We actually see these ideas springing all the way from the first memory tape. So this being potentially before he ever tampered with the fog condensers.
We just need one of their own who's on our side. I can't let anyone know what I'm about to do. I'll need to set up the equipment far away from Acadia. It'll double as a place to bury the evidence.
But surely DiMA, the savior of the synths, would never go that far. He could not do something as severe as actually killing someone. After all, tampering with the fog condensers was never actually directly pulling the trigger. Well, if you believe he could not be so robotic as to commit a premeditated, cold-blooded murder, then you would be wrong.
Did she have to die? The woman I'm replacing? God, she looks so peaceful lying there.
Don't. Please. That blood is on my hands, not yours.
Yes, the lovely and welcoming Captain Avery is just a synth replacement of the woman who was once the strong leader of Far Harbor, giving DiMA the person on the inside that he wished for, and allowing him to keep the peace for a while. However, this would not be the only synth who infiltrated Far Harbor. There would also be the other friendly face we see running one of the stores, this being Brooks. It also seems as if it is not exactly common knowledge that he is a synth based on how he reacts.
I'm working with Chase. She told me that your designation is L792.
Okay, I believe you. Keep it down, all right? It's real private information.
So with this, although the town seems friendly with Acadia, especially because of the fog condensers, DiMA seems to have an issue with allowing the town to have control over itself, having the leader under his thumb as a voice of peace on the island, even with the increasing hostility from the children of the Atom, which went against several of the Harbormen's opinions. With Brooks also being a synth, this would allow an easy way to meet the synths on their arrival to Far Harbor, along with another voice encouraging peace. However, this is not the only potentially dangerous action that DiMA would do in the rising tension between the groups. After being cast out of Far Harbor, the children of the Atom cult would of course need a new home. And what better than a submarine base to allow them to inhabit? Considering that not only does it literally have weapons that could destroy the island, but it is also a fortress. All of that could be forgiven if you see it as just an exercise of trust. However, with the memory banks being stored there, now this is where it really becomes problematic, considering these drives contain some rather helpful information for those in the Children of the Atom, especially the High Confessor Tectus, who would not be considered a friend to those in Far Harbor. These drives not only had information about the submarine's launch codes, so the Children of the Atom could well meet the Atom through the division, but they also had data on how to wipe Far Harbor off the map, which would have been essential in winning the war against Far Harbor without many casualties on the Children of the Atom side. This being if one was smart enough to access the place they have stored along with the computer itself. Considering this, it may have only been a matter of time before someone gained access to those memories. So now we should answer the question, was DiMA trying to save the synths, or was he just a master manipulator? Well, for this, there is one question you must ask yourself. Does the end justify the means? DiMA wanted to ensure the continuation of his group. To do this, he infiltrated Far Harbor, which was the location his free synths would arrive at. He ensured their safe passage, and he ensured control over Far Harbor, so they would never prevent his synths from passing through. Considering those who were truly synths would be mostly unaffected by the toxins in the fog if something was to happen to Far Harbor, so having a contingency plan to stop the fog condensers would have allowed his civilization to continue somewhat unhindered if things went south. Also considering that Acadia is, after all, above the fog, So those who are there, human, synth, or even dog, would not be affected whilst at the observatory due to its elevation. And with the goal of the children of the atom being to essentially destroy themselves, having the codes almost within reach of them would have been awfully tempting if they knew. With all of this, you could consider that DiMA wanted to ensure Acadia's survival, even provided the other groups with ample opportunities to wipe each other off the island, providing assurance for his synths to survive. After all, he did only recruit synths through his broadcast, right?
There's still the issue of this girl, Kasumi. She thinks she's a synth.
I can tell you that she's not one of ours. I mean, if she's a synth, obviously she belongs to the Institute, but I have no record of an asset deployed with that identity.
Considering that Kasumi is not actually a synth, then it is likely that DiMA's real target was more of those who were lost and could be easily controlled. Yes, synths were a preference, but any functioning humanoid would be helpful in setting up his little town on the mountain and assisting it with being self-sustainable. Considering his goal surrounding Acadia was claimed to be a safe haven for synths, and making it self-sustainable, so not relying on, Far Harbor or the Children of the Atom, you could say he failed, but it is more likely that he wanted control over others and to manipulate others. Providing a sort of society where he had control, he hid dangerous information from his co-founders until it became almost too late.
My old memory banks in the submarine base.
I can't believe you never told me about those. I have to wait until they become a security risk.
Meaning that it was never truly about the safety of other synths, but the control of them and of the island. So the end, in this case, does not justify the means of getting there, as DiMA just uses his position with those on the island as a way to manipulate them. With Avery's death, he would have convinced her to go there as a trusted friend. Before killing her, he convinced humans they were synths, and he increased the hostility between the two fighting factions, as if they weren't having enough issues with getting along already. So let me know in the comments, do you think DiMA was a savior to the synths, or do you think that he was just manipulating those around him? However, there is another aspect surrounding this that we have yet to discuss.
One more question, if you'll indulge me. You're here for Kasumi, but I suspect there could be another reason you came to us. Tell me, are you a synth?
In this video, we break down whether or not the sole survivor could be a synth. So make sure you check it out, because maybe you are a synth.